In this video, we are going to talk about cosine x and cosine inverse x functions. So first of all, we will talk about the cosine x. So let's begin. As you can see, this is my x-axis and this is my y-axis. This point is origin. I'm considering the point on the right side as pi over 2, pi, and 3 pi over 2. And the point that I'm considering on the left of origin is negative pi over 2, negative pi, negative 3 over 2 pi, negative 2 pi, and negative 5 over 2 pi. The values that I'm considering on the y-axis is positive 1 and negative 1. Now let's graph the function. So this is the graph of the cosine function. As you can see, the maximum value of cosine function is 1 and the minimum value is negative 1. And you can consider any value for which the function cosine x is defined. So the domain of cosine x is R, in other words, all the values on the x-axis. And the range is negative 1 and 1 because the value of cosine lies between negative 1 and 1, including the end values. And the periodicity of cosine function is 2 pi because the cosine function repeats itself after an interval of 2 pi. Now let's talk about some more properties of cosine function. So this is my first quadrant, second quadrant, third quadrant, and fourth quadrant. As you can see, we start from 0, go all the way to pi over 2, from pi over 2 to pi, from pi to 3 pi over 2, and from 3 pi over 2 to 2 pi. The value of cosine is positive in the first quadrant, and it can be anything from 1 to 0. The value of cosine is negative in the second quadrant, and the values changes from 0 to negative 1. The value of cosine is negative in third quadrant, and the values change from negative 1 to 0. And the value of cosine is positive in the fourth quadrant, and the value changes from 0 to 1. Now let's talk about the cosine inverse function. So this is my x-axis, and I'm considering 2 points on the x-axis. The first point I'm considering is negative 1 on the left of origin, and the second point that I'm considering is positive 1, which is on the right side of origin. The values that I'm considering on the y-axis is pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi, and 5 pi over 2. And these values are over the x-axis. The values below the x-axis are negative pi over 2, negative pi, and negative 3 pi over 2. Now let's graph the cosine inverse function. So if we graph the cosine inverse function, we will get this kind of graph. I'm going to consider 2 points on the graph. Let's first consider this point. So when angle is pi, the value is negative 1, and when angle is 0, the value is 1. Now let's consider the domain and range of this cosine inverse function. So the domain of cosine inverse function is negative 1 and 1, as you can see from here to here, and range is 0 to pi. If we consider the only branch from 0 to pi for cosine inverse x, then this branch of cosine inverse from 0 to pi is known as principal value branch of cosine inverse x.